It's David Ducker coming back at you, and today we're going to be talking about exposition tax. It's a great concept a friend introduced me to, Charles Warman, member of our regular group. Yes, that's his real last name, the War Man. And I wanted to share this with you. Exposition tax basically means the more changes you make in your setting from the real world or from the pre-established canon, the longer it is going to take you to explain your version of the setting or the world to your players. So basically, for each new element, you need to have a scene that introduces this element. And I love this concept because you can go down the list and look at your setting and look at all of the different elements you need to introduce and then just plan accordingly. If you're going to say, okay, I have hover cars and I have laser guns and I have psychic powers and robots and clones and cyborgs and AI and faster than light travel and force fields, and I've got aliens. Now you got 10 things you have to do before you can do anything with the setting as a whole, because you have to introduce each element. And not every element will need introduction scene, and some will need more than one scene though. So one element per one scene is a good kind of barometer. Like, do you need a scene for laser guns? Maybe you do and maybe you don't, depending on your setting. If I'm doing a setting that has regular guns, modern firearms, and lasers, I might want to do a scene to contrast them. Especially if it's in space, because lasers have no recoil, so you can use them in 0G. But lasers can be stopped by things like fog or rain or dust. They can hit that instead of their target. And of course, you want to contrast the power levels. Maybe lasers are lower powered so they don't blow out the hull of a spaceship. So you get this situation where space marines and other people in space prefer lasers. But you can contrast and say, okay, but guns are more powerful, but the recoil will spin you off into space. And they can shoot through the hull and cause depressurization. If these are important elements, it's going to take longer to describe them. If they're not important elements, you could probably just mention, oh, that guy's got a laser gun on his belt, and just mention it. And you might need to give detail, and you might not. But I thought this way of thinking about your setting is going to be really, really helpful. And it can work in a story as well. If your story has 10 factions, then you're going to need to spend at least one scene introducing each before your characters know what the political web is like, and can start really playing the political game, the Game of Thrones. Because, and of course, in Game of Thrones, as a narrative structure, they don't do this, but that's because it's a linear media. It's a story. Role-playing, we have an interactive media. You have to know everything before you get started, or know as much as your character would know. You don't have to know everything, but enough to role-play your character. Sometimes that's a lot. You might have to go through and say, okay, well, there's 3 regions and each has 3 noble houses, and I've got to politically play them off each other. So right there, I've got 9 scenes that I have to get through, and they might need more. That's just political. Then you might have like your religious factions, criminal, mercantile factions. There could be foreign elements that are important in this game, other races. So yeah, this is especially useful in a sandbox where your players need to know so they can make decisions, because they have agency and they drive the plot. If you're in a railroad and all the momentum comes from the GM, Players might not need to know what's going on. You just tell them what they need to know for this scene. And they don't get to make decisions, so it doesn't matter if they're ignorant of certain options, because really they don't have any options. And that's fine. I love railroads, especially if they're well written. It's just it requires a lot of skill and time to make a well written railroad. And as a GM, I don't have that kind of time, so I make a really nice setting that just release the players and try to guide them through the exposition so they can understand what's going on. And then things get really hot because they're wheeling and dealing and pulling schemes and manipulations. Usually in my games, about half of the whole campaign length. So you got the whole campaign. About half of that length is just exposition, getting to know the setting. So in Game of Thrones, it was getting to know those nine noble houses. The merchants were not important at all in that culture, so we didn't have to spend time on them. But the 9 houses, the various churches, the arcane schools and orders. There were not many foreign elements, but there were a couple. So that took 25 sessions to get through everything they needed to know. And they had fun adventures through there. It's not like it was just all talking. Sometimes the best way to learn about somebody is fighting them or fighting with them against a common enemy. And they had, small local kind of things. Save the princess, defend the castle, recover the artifact, burn the witch, find the werewolf. All these little side quest type things gave them a chance to learn about the people involved. So that when we got to, session 25, 26, you can start with the back half. Now that these houses are fighting each other, now the wizards and the priests aren't getting along, and all of these big major power plays are happening. But because we took the time to explore and know what's going on, the players can make intelligent, informed decisions about what they want to do. And they have history with those characters. You can say, I helped you defend your city from the orcs. So now I want you to back my man, to be the new king. You owe me one. Or it can be, I hate your guts. I went through that dungeon, I recovered the artifact, you stole it from me at the last minute. And now you want my help? Son. And maybe you kind of want to be on that side. You hate the people on that side. So, it's important to have exposition, not just for the knowledge, but for the history. And I've done another video about that, so I'm sorry for sidetracking. But again, I just wanted to share this great thing, this great way of thinking, this mode of thought, to say for every new thing, for every important thing in your setting, whether it's a faction, whether it's a law of physics that the real world doesn't have, whether it's a cultural quirk, everything that's different from the real world or from the historical setting or from the regular, Star Wars canon, whatever you're doing, everything that's new, you have to you have to allot time to show the players how it's different. Not tell them, show them. Show, don't tell. I guess one other quick thing before I go is I'll say, and I've said this in another video too, but it bears repeating here, that avoid information overload. You can only probably introduce 3 elements per session that are new. If you introduce 4, 6, 9 new things in one session, they'll only remember 3 of them, okay? And they'll feel overwhelmed and burned out. So you have to pace yourself so that they can remember what's going on. So if you have 9 factions to introduce, it's going to take at least 3 sessions to introduce all of them. And in my game, it's going to take 9 sessions to introduce each of them because they're all very complicated. So, this is just a great way of thinking that I wanted to share. Plan ahead, see what you have to get through, figure out how you're going to get through it, and give yourself time to get through it. For my campaigns, they all run for a year, so I have 52 sessions. So I have to plan ahead. So I have 25 sessions of exposition. And I still have action and adventure and excitement on a small scale, and I have time to get through all the elements we need to get through, but only at a pace of 3 per session. So that's, that first half of the game requires a lot more planning and pacing and paying attention from me. And then once we're at the halfway point, the players know exactly what's going on. They know the world like the back of their hand, then I can really just sit back and relax. And the players do all the work for me, as long as I've made them into a team so they don't split. But that's part of character creation, and I have another video on that too. But as long as they're a team, they stick together. Now they understand what's going on. Now the team just, they go to town, and they drive their own plots and stories that I never could have thought of, never would have thought of. And their stories they're interested in. Instead of me doing a lot of work putting a story together and then they don't even care. This way they drive into a story. So yeah, this was a great way of expressing that, why you should plan, and a little bit about how to plan ahead. But we're going to call it Exposition Tax. For every new element, there must be a scene to explain it, and not a GM rambling, but a character in the world, or several characters showing this element off, showing, not telling. So anyway, I've rambled at you long enough. Let me know what you think of this idea and mode of thought in the comments below. And until I see you again, good day and good gaming.